Hello. I just wanted to share something that I just written. Pretty happy with it. I was going to video record. Sometimes what I do is I type out a Word document because I'm so paranoid about losing my material, which has happened in the past. I get a video recorder and I scroll down and I record it. But I thought, oh, why not? I'll just read out some of the material. It's about the nature of the soul. And I'm dealing with the problem of how Aquinas understands the beatific vision, the face-to-face vision of God. And this leads me to inquire into how the soul, or the intellect if you like, how God can produce certain reactions or responses in the soul even without you willing those responses. These actualities just arise in you. And that is, I believe, how Aquinas understands the vision of God. It happens to you. You don't do it. It is not a response. It's a passive thing in a way. And yet the intellect is dynamic. It's a difficult and subtle thing to get your head around, but this is what I'm trying to understand at the moment. So here we go. In heaven, the intellect is flooded with divine light and is thereby made to see God face to face. Yet this act of seeing God does not in itself involve any act of consent or self-donation in response to God. That might come afterwards, but the vision itself doesn't involve that self-donation. While there may have been antecedent acts of freedom in this life, in via, which merited or prepared for the gift of beatitude, in some sense, in heaven the face of God simply appears to the person, independently of any personal yes to God. The vision of God takes place in the soul, but not through some act of freedom on the side of the creature. Now here I need to explain what I mean by freedom. I don't mean what philosophers call the libertarian ability to determine your response in a situation in which there are different ways of responding that are both genuinely possible at the same time. By freedom, I simply mean the power to give your personal yes in response to something that's presented as good. In heaven, we still have that freedom. We don't have the libertarian free will to decide between good and evil, though. We only have that in this life. So what I've just said is that the beatific vision, the face-to-face vision of God, happens to the soul. But this raises a problem. If the intellect is spiritual, when I say intellect, it could also just mean soul. If the intellect is spiritual, how could the beatific vision simply happen to it involuntarily? Surely the vision of God can't be imprinted on the intellect in the way that a shape is imprinted on inert wax. So here's my response to that problem. It must be that the intellect is naturally dynamic and responsive to spiritual influences in its own way. That certain actualities can be induced in the intellect even without the person's free consent. More precisely, without their concurrent free consent. By that I don't mean that these actualities are produced against the person's concurrent will, but that they sort of bypass it or work past it, as it were. Let me explain what I mean by concurrent free consent. What I don't mean is this. Let's say I agree to something after the fact. the example that Aquinas gives is, I agree, I will, I affirm as good my own existence, but I'm not consenting to it in a way that makes it happen. My consent happens after the fact. So this type of agreement presupposes the object and merely goes alongside it without causing it or facilitating it. It's in this way that I agree to my existence as a creature. Now, by contrast, concurrent free consent is an ongoing act of willing without which the object can't begin or continue to occur. And note again, this ongoing act of consent doesn't have to be libertarian. Now, our hypothesis, to repeat, is that certain actualities, including the beatific vision, can be induced in the intellect even without the person's concurrent free consent. That's not to deny that the induced actuality, in this case the beatific vision, is radically agreeable to the subject in which it is induced. Nor does it exclude the possibility of the subject agreeing wholeheartedly to its happy situation after the fact, metaphysically speaking, and at every moment of its beatitude. Now, I said that the intellect is naturally dynamic and responsive, in order to indicate that God and creatures also are able to produce waves of actuality in the ocean of the intellect, independently of the ongoing free consent of the person. The soul, I believe, is a vulnerable nature in the way that, say, an ocean is exposed to the ever-changing atmosphere. The soul is a vulnerable nature in the way that an ocean is exposed to the ever-changing atmosphere. But that does not mean that the actualities, the waves, which God induces in the soul are strictly in the order of nature, as if it were possible for something non-divine to produce them. No, God propagates himself, the divine energy that he is, through the medium that is the soul. The vibrations thus induced are such that no creature could induce them by its own nature. Only God can move the soul to a point where it wants only to donate itself in perfect love and without qualification. So there you go. I hope you enjoy that. Feel free to add comments. Sorry about the rough and ready video. Have a good day.